And we're live. It is Thursday, December 3rd, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. And a funny thing happened today. The House Government Affairs Committee, I told Kate we weren't going to monologue today, but now I realized I kind of have to say this. The House Government Affairs Committee released a bunch of documents, including some correspondence between me and one Jim Comey back when he was FBI director. And I got immediate emails from people demanding to know whether this showed that I was part of some kind of conspiracy, to which, of course, the answer is, I don't know. It shows that I emailed some stuff to Jim Comey. And that's really all I have to say on the subject. Glenn Greenwald seems to think it's a big deal. And
so does the Daily Caller.
So does the Daily Caller. And
which gives you a sense of where Glenn Greenwald is these days.
Yeah, and so for all of you guys who want my statement on this subject, I gave it to the Daily Caller, and they were good enough to print a small part of it. Here is the entire thing. Oh, it says it's too long to fit in the Crowdcast chat, so here's the first half of it in the Crowdcast chat, and here is the second half of it in the Crowdcast chat. All right, that is my full statement on the subject. The story is frankly too dumb to warrant any of anybody's time than this. However, that is my statement, and fuck it. We're not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, and it's really in lieu of fun, we not only have a pandemic, but we have Russian intelligence officers apparently wielding against our intelligence officers and our diplomats and White House staffers on the streets of Washington directed energy weapons. And this has been a story that has been sort of trickling out ever since an incident some years ago in Havana. But recently, the very fine journalist Julia Yaffe, who may be in the audience or may not, in a long piece in GQ magazine, described the scope and scale of this operation, as well as giving a sense of the number of our people that it has actually affected, assuming that we have correctly identified what it is. And it focused on one of those people, Marc Polymeropoulos. Now, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did pronounce it correctly. That was very good.
So I was having trouble pronouncing it until yesterday when Ada Palmer took one look at your name and said, wow, that means easy. Plastic City. And the moment she said that, I have not had trouble remembering it since. So, Marc, welcome to In Lieu of Fun.
Thank you.
And let's start by just introducing yourself a little bit. You had a 21-year CIA career. You're not a kook. Have you ever suggested that you've been abducted by aliens?
No, not this week.
You're not you weren't ever, put on leave at CIA for, mental illness reasons. Or,
I wish I had taken more leave.
So you're relatively psychologically normal person, right?
After a 26-year career with multiple war zones, and doing a lot of crazy things, I'm not sure you would call me, that stable psychologically. But on a serious note, I had a tremendous career. I retired in the senior intelligence service ranks. I had a lot more kind of juice in the tank, and then some really unfortunate things happened to me in December 2017 in Moscow. Let me just back up 1 second, though, in terms of what your starting monologue. Because you are now an official member of the deep state, you all can join John Cipher and I at the Vienna Inn, where we have our secret meetings.
Okay.
So that's really, Vienna Inn is a dive bar in Vienna, Virginia. So we invite everybody in the audience to join us. That's the nerve center.
I do want to point out that that's a challenging statement to me, because there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about how lawfare secretly runs the deep state. And so when you say that there's a dive bar in Vienna, Virginia, where the deep state is actually run, you're hitting me kind of where it hurts here. Because, like, what if they hear you on Fox News and they decide that I'm actually not secretly the puppet master?
That's right. Well,
so don't listen to this guy. So tell us a little bit about your career.
Sure.
You were not an old Russia hand.
No, it was not. Yeah. So let me
who
start.
Are you?
Who am I? Well, so, my last name Polymeropoulos always is a big hit whenever I do stuff like this. I was in the Middle East and in the early, I think it was 2006, and I was the deputy of one of our stations, and some of the president's briefers were going down to give President Bush the PDB, and they wanted my analysis, my take on this, and they called, and I kind of gave them my name, and I was waiting kind of eagerly several hours later. It's a relatively big deal. I wanted to know what the president thought, and they came back, and I said, well, how'd it go? And they said they spent the entire time in the Oval Office trying to pronounce my last name. So that's, it's always a good introduction. So I spent 26 years at the agency. I was a Middle East hand. I did 7 overseas tours, 6 actually, 1 kind of domestic tour, which we don't talk much about, but I was there. I spent almost 3 years in war zones, including a lot of time in Iraq in the beginning, going in with naval special warfare units in 2003. And then I was a base chief in Afghanistan, and then a lot of time in the Middle East. And so the end of my career was interesting. I had reached the senior intelligence service ranks, and at the time...
And just for those viewers who don't know, the senior intelligence service, it doesn't have quite an analog in... But this is the group of people who have spent a lot of time in the agency. They're essentially the management core of the agency, and there's the agency doesn't quite have the upper out tradition that the military does, but if you're not good, you do not become a senior intelligence service.
I think
member.
4% of the workforce in the director of operations reaches the senior intelligence. So it's similar to a flag officer rank in the military. I mean, if you want to have anything to equate, you don't manage so many people. But I had been a kind of a veteran of the covert action wars, counterterrorism and other things for 20 years, or at that time 17 since 9/11. And so they brought me to oversee CIA's clandestine operations in what we call Europe and Eurasia, which includes Turkey, Ukraine, all of Europe, and of course Russia, because they wanted to kind of bring that same ethos that we had in the war on terrorism, frankly, to kind of take it to the Russians, not with covert action authorities, but just that same kind of mantra that this was, for us after 2016, after the Russian election interference, this was our 9/11. It was like September 12th. And so they brought a whole bunch of us from kind of the Middle East and counterterrorism shops over to run Russian operations or oversee them. The irony is I'd spent years and years in really bad, tough places. And then I end up, having a kind of a career ending incident of all places in Moscow in December 2017.
So tell us about the career ending incident.
Sure.
And, what do you know for sure about what happened, and there's sort of 2 parts of this, right? There's actually what happened to you, what you know about what happened to you, and then there's what you can put together based on what happened to a lot of other people.
Others, right.
Right. So walk us through the specifics of what you know beyond any shadow of a doubt, because you experienced it.
And I think that's really important, and it's what I've been really transparent about. I mean, so first of all, the idea of talking openly about this, it was difficult for me, and I spent a lot of time because I was very frustrated that I wasn't getting the right medical care. So I just throw that out there. This is not easy to come out, and I chose Julia Yaffe, who's a fantastic journalist at GQ. She's a Russia expert, and I chose her to kind of tell my story, and I did so very deliberately. And so I think the article was a really strange time for me. But ultimately, in December of 2017, I went to Moscow. I went there to visit Ambassador Huntsman, who was a tremendous representative for the United States government, big support of the agency, but also, his former ambassador in Beijing. So I wanted to make a trip there, but I also wanted an area familiarization trip because I had not been to Russia before. So it was a 10-day trip to both Moscow and St. Petersburg. As part of that, I also had meetings scheduled with the Russian government, including our interlocutors in the Russian intelligence services. Our relationship, as you know, was terrible at the time, but still, we were under constant pressure, and that's always it's a whole other debate, but a constant pressure to find kind of common ground with the Russians. And so I was going to talk to them, among other things, about possible counterterrorism cooperation, which really ended up going nowhere. They didn't want me to go on the trip. We actually, myself and one other officer, when they granted the visa, they came back and they actually later on said they'd prefer that we not come. They thought for some reason, as you know, I was a senior intelligence service officer who was, certainly known to multiple services, including theirs. For some reason, they thought I was going to come run operations on the streets of Moscow, which is ludicrous. They asked us not to go, but we ended up insisting on coming because, it was the right thing to do. And so what happened was, it was in the first several days of the trip, staying at a Moscow 5-star hotel, which, not the one that Trump stayed but one close to the embassy. An event happened to me, and let me preface this again. I'm not a kook. I had at that time I was 48 years old. I was still rising in the organization. I was a SIS-4. I mean, so that's a very senior member of the senior intelligence service. I was being talked about to kind of go up onto the 7th floor as well. I had, and I say this really modestly, but I received multiple intelligence medals and awards, and so I was really, at 48, I had a lot more in the tank, and but I woke up so I say that in that I'm not a kook. And it's really, you have to be careful on this because it's such a strange incident. But in any event, I woke.
It's a strange incident,
yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that if one person had experienced, you might infer that they were a kook. Right. But the context in which it happens is rebutting of that. So tell the story.
So we had recently. It was the first several days of the trip. I believe I remember it was on December 5th. And we'd come back from dinner. And I went to sleep. Obviously it was, you have some jet lag, but I woke up in the middle of the night. I didn't hear anything, but I woke up with this incredible sense of vertigo, tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. I couldn't stand up. I've been shot at. I've had rockets go off near my head, shrapnel come flying by me. This was by far the most terrifying incident of my life. I literally was stumbling around and I couldn't stand up. I was incredibly nauseous. I was sick to my stomach. So something had occurred. I managed to finally get back to sleep. The next morning, I made it to a local pharmacy, where I took some medication kind of to battle the nausea. I stabilized a little bit. Several days later, the same thing happened again, in which I was at a restaurant and I nearly passed out from this vertigo and nausea and just dizziness. I spent the rest of the trip, or a good 24 hours later, just holed up in my hotel room, and then finally made it home, where I started on this 3-year journey of going to, multiple doctors, different specialists, neurologists. I've been treated at the National Institute of Health, at Georgetown Neurology. It's this long kind of journey to try to find out what happened to me. And the fact is, it's still a medical mystery. So when I talk about, what happened to me, those are the exact details. I've had multiple MRIs, nothing comes up on them. I've had so much different, neuroscience testing, vestibular testing. They put me in one of those chambers that the astronauts go through, and they spin you around. And it's a crazy, miserable experience. And nothing's coming up. And so, with all this said, some things then happened afterwards that I think caused a lot of us to realize, because other incidents against some of CIA personnel and others happened to cause us to realize that there may be something more to this than just some unknown illness.
So just to be super clear, because it wasn't from how you said it, you had those experiences while you were in Russia, and then you came back and tried to figure out what was going on. But did you ever have one of those experiences once you left Russia?
No, I had one incidence of vertigo when I came back, but to be honest, I missed almost 4 months of work, starting in February, March of 2018. I lost my long-term vision. I had this incredible vertigo, and what I have to this day is a 24/7 headache. So the diagnosis I do have is called occipital neuralgia, in which it's a chronic pain. It's a headache at about a 3-4 level that literally hasn't gone away for 3 years. Which is incredible. It's frustrating. It's physically frustrating. It's emotionally taxing. and you just kind of go to numerous specialists, and they're trying to figure out some ways to relieve that pain. I went through our Office of Medical Services. Of course, immediately they were suspicious that this was similar to incidents in Havana, Cuba, in which our officers, were having similar, not exactly the same, but had a lot of, they think they suffered technical attacks. I did not kind of match the same Havana protocols, so our Office of Medical Services was kind of mystified this well, and it's a whole separate issue. I think that's something that I've talked to various congressional committees and others about, that our OMS staff did not handle this particularly well. And so, and then ultimately it forced me in July of 2019 to retire. I mean, I could not go, and I still can't do a full day's work, just because of these debilitating headaches.
So there are several aspects of this that we could spend 2 hours
Sure.
on. But I want to focus on a couple. One is how you became convinced that this was likely to be the result of a directed energy attack by Russian intelligence. And so let's talk about that first.
Yep.
And then the second broad issue I want to talk about is why Gina Haspel and the agency brass has not been more aggressive about this. Because if your theory is correct, and judging from Julia's story, there's certainly a lot of reason to think it is, we have an ongoing pattern of Russian intelligence physically attacking U.S. personnel. You'd think that'd be something that the former head of Russia House at CIA would have something to say about, right?
Sure.
So, let's take those two issues in turn. What's your confidence level that you've, not the medical side, but that you've diagnosed the geopolitical side of this accurately?
So look, let me talk about, I talked about kind of my direct, of course, experience with what happened to me. After I retired, some other things happened, and so I have to be careful on this, and that's why Julia was very good in her piece. I also have a secrecy agreement that I have to abide by. So when I'm going to source things to Julia's article and then just take it from there, and I was not the source on those things, but we have to be careful. So, after I retired, and then what happened afterwards is there was 4 or 5 incidents where CIA officers and State Department officers were going overseas, all of them having something to do with Russian operations, whether it's training liaison, talking to liaison, or senior CIA officials, and they were suffering the same kind of attacks. And what, according to the article, Russia House was able to do was using a technique called geofencing. They were able to correlate the travel of Russian intelligence officers to the exact sites of where these attacks occurred. And so what they built was a circumstantial case that somehow the Russians were involved. And that's where it stands. And I think it's very fair to say there is a circumstantial case. There is no smoking gun, but certainly enough where it gave everybody at CIA, and certainly in Russia House and others, significant pause that, wait a second, something is not right here. So, Mark may have been patient zero. Now, all these other incidents happened outside of Moscow, interestingly, but all of them were with individuals who were involved in some fashion or another in Russian operations. And the diagnosis that I have, which is occipital neuralgia, is precisely what has happened to them as well. There's current officers, within CIA now who have really suffered. And so that's where, my understanding, per Julia's article, and I'm being careful on this, but this is where my understanding of where it stands. And so you have, it's in some ways similar to the bounty issue. I think the bounty issue, from everything I read, was a much stronger case, but there's a circumstantial case that the Russians were up to no good here. And so it certainly warrants further investigation.
Okay, but let's, so you're being actually very fair to the other side here, the other side being not the Russians, but those who would be skeptical of it. But let's situate this against some things that aren't meaningfully in dispute, which is we have video of the Russians attacking a U.S. A CIA personnel, physically assaulting outside the embassy. Yeah. We have a series of Novichok attacks on foreign targets. they've been super aggressive, and they have feared God little and feared getting caught even less.
I agree.
And so, and I think it is fair to say, given the locations in which these incidents have happened, that it is not the Cubans operating in Guangzhou, and it is not the Chinese operating in Cuba, right? And it is, and so I think the if you add the specific geofencing data to the general pattern of Russian aggressiveness, to the implausibility of this being anybody else.
Right.
I mean, it's not the Iranians.
No, and so look, I think you're 100% right, and I have to be really careful on this because again, I don't want to come across as a conspiracy mongering kook. So when and I think that the smart people I talk to who are still inside are being very careful as well because it's a really big deal. I think that there is general consensus in the medical community, and this is from the doctors at NIH or University of Pennsylvania. I'm off to Walter Reed in January. I did get into the
you finally got your referral?
I did, and I'll kind of talk about that a little bit because a lot of it had to do with Julia's article and then and the work of some others. The Walter Reed, which has the leading TBI program, the traumatic brain injury program on the planet, the doctors there think that this was an external event. And then you have individuals in the National Academy of Sciences, which has a report which has not been released yet, but Dr. Dave Relman, who wrote, was partially responsible for the report, has been very public about this, that he wants this released. And from everything that we hear from them is that they believe it was, some kind of microwave weapon. Now, this is what happened to the officers in Cuba, but it still is relevant to us. So there is this body of evidence. And you have to look at it, I was an operations guy, but you look at this analytically. I mean, there is a very strong circumstantial case that something's up. And with a history of Russian behavior, again, I joke about my good friend and one of my former mentors in John Cipher. John Cipher, is a veteran of Russian operations, and he can talk for hours and hours on all the things the Russians have done to our officers, diplomatic personnel in Moscow. So there's history to this.
Okay, but just to be clear, is there any other country that we know of that is fascinated by the exoticism of attacks the way the Russians are? I mean, the Novichok thing, the radioactive poisoning thing, the ricin thing back in the Soviet days. The Russians have a theatrical quality to the way their intelligence services attack people. I mean, the famous extreme case is the ice pick in Trotsky's head in Mexico City. There's no other intelligence service that goes around the world flamboyantly attacking people, right?
That's correct. Right, that's correct. And so, and there is, so the answer to that is yes. And the other part is we know they've developed this weapon. I mean, there's NSA declassified documents that show the existence that the Russians have been working on this for decades. Now it's also a perfect weapon in the sense, if this was what occurred, it incapacitates someone. So this is not something that's going to cause death, but it will do enough to in essence take you off the ball field.
And so
it's exactly what you want. Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
No, it's like it and mostly it's like it's super creepy. I mean, there is just this unknown element. You wake up in the middle of the night. There's like how you're seemingly, you think you're alone. Like, what has just happened? I'm just very. It seems like it seems, as Ben said, like it is very fear based. It's not outcome based. It's about creating a sense of fear and kind of So so I'm really curious, actually, as you were standing up like that and or trying to stand up in your hotel room when this first happened, did you think that you'd eaten something? Did you think that you were having a stroke, or did you think, holy shit, maybe I'm getting attacked by Russian intelligence?
No, the first, the first thing I thought was food poisoning. Honestly, I mean, it was because I'd never, it wasn't, but it was so bad. Of course, it crossed my mind kind of later on during the trip, but still, it's, it would be, again, I was a very senior officer going there. That's such a brazen, it would be such a brazen move for it to have happened to me. It really became more clear, of course, as I really suffered in the months and years ahead, but then along with the exact same thing happening to others. And when I say exact same thing, these are CIA officers who have gone off and been treated at NIH, been treated at Walter Reed, been diagnosed with the same thing, and again have with the benefit of this geofencing technique. So you kind of start putting these things
sure.
together, and it certainly warrants further investigation. I think there are things that need to come out, such as the National Academy of Sciences study, which does talk about Havana, but the conclusion, I think, will be that it was, some type of microwave weapon. And then, like and I know, and I have to be careful in this as well, but there's a body of knowledge of things like this within the United States government, with the U.S. military, and with other experts that I know that the agency has certainly consulted with. Nobody who really is in the know on this thinks this is a great surprise. It's much more of a shock to kind of the outside world, is why would the Russians do this to our diplomatic and official or intelligence personnel? But then even if the Russians, maybe it's not such a big jump.
Go ahead, then.
Yeah. So this brings me to Gina Haspel.
Sure.
Right. So, all right. People say a lot of mean things about Gina Haspel because she works for Donald Trump, because she's, was involved in the coercive interrogation / torture program, etc. I don't want to get into any of that. I am the director of the CIA.
Right.
My people are being attacked. There's a strongish circumstantial case that we know who's doing it. There's no plausible competing theory, at least not that I've heard.
Right.
And she seems super resistant to, as Julia reports, there's no evidence she has brought it to the president.
Right.
There is also no evidence that she's raised it with her counterparts in Russia, except at your request by not sending a Christmas card. Now, I don't understand that as a management, granted my schooling in this is reading John le Carré novels, but
right.
It seems to me if you don't defend your people, Carla's going to get your people.
Right.
And if you want to send a message to Carla, you got to send a message to Carla. So she knows this. What is her hesitance about responding to this in an aggressive or even non-timid fashion? She's not a shrinking violet.
Right. So I think let me just be very clear. So I retired in July of 2019. This was not, the subsequent cases occurred after that. And so this was brought to her attention and briefed to her. If and this is per Julia's reporting, also per Natasha Bertrand and Politico has reported on this as well. And again, I have to be very clear. I was not the source of these things. Because I think right. The agency really pointed a finger at me after this, and I've been very honest in all of my public outreach and media. I'm very honest in my secrecy agreement, and I talk on the record only. I never talk on background to anyone. But ultimately, from all the accounts is that she was briefed on this and she dismissed it. And I think there's two things involved. One, and again, and I'm pretty open in my criticism of CIA's Office of Medical Services. For whatever reason, the senior medical staff was very dismissive of this, and I don't know if it's for liability concerns or other reasons, but they have accused me and they have accused others of making this up. There is nobody, let me add, in the Directorate of Operations chain, including the current Deputy Director of Operations. The most senior Directorate of Operations personnel completely believes that something has occurred. It really comes down to the Office of Medical Services senior staff, who have then, I think, influenced Gina on this, to be honest. I'm not giving her a pass on this. I'm just saying that ultimately she was getting really bad advice on this. But there's no doubt she dismissed it to the point where, as you saw in some of the reporting, that mid-level, really talented officers. One of them in particular actually resigned, because of this. That when he was briefing Director Haspel on this, and she really discounted it, he was so disgusted that he actually ended up resigning. That's really bad. That's kind of doesn't go to our ethos of telling truth to power. I think subsequently, when and I'm not giving myself credit on this, it's because it was public. I'm a authoritative public face of the agency. Before this, I came out, a former intelligence officer. I came out and with the GQ story. Look, I know that friends of mine, including 3 former directors of the CIA, were very vocal with our 7th floor and saying, why are you not actually treating the personnel? Like, let's put that one bin aside on who did this, but your mantra, your ethos as a leader is you have to take care of your personnel. And so I think the key point is that at this, that now there's a lot of pressure put that we will have our officers go through kind of proper medical care. But Ben goes back to the same point, is that she did dismiss it in the beginning. There's no doubt about that. You can go through different scenarios after the whole issue with the bounty, with the bounties in Afghanistan. This would be conceivably just another kind of incident like that with intelligence that was circumstantial. I think the bounty intelligence was probably much more kind of meaty and significant. But maybe you just don't want to take this to the president again, kind of more Russian perfidy. And so, I can't speak for why Director Haspel acted in the way she did.
And continues to. Like it's not like there's just, it seems to be like, I'm just really was surprised when I read the GQ piece that Julie wrote, that I was surprised that it was the first time I was like really hearing about it. I think that there's, as you say, there's like a world in which this is not at all that surprising to people that are maybe in it. But I think that the reason that GQ piece was so powerful was that it was the very stuff of novels and kind of everything else that, and how it played out.
No, I agree. And I think that Julia's piece, when it came out, the reaction from inside that I heard from inside the agency is no one disputed any of the facts in it. I think there was some significant irritation that I had chosen this route. I will tell you very clearly that I told the agency I was going to do this. I went and then I told senior agency officers the day after I talked to Julie. They were not surprised at all because they knew I was getting irritated because they weren't signing the paperwork for me to get to Walter Reed. And ultimately, that was the only recourse that I had.
It probably gave them, with the story, eventually gave them cover to do it.
Well, it did, and they did. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, nobody has disputed anything of Julia's story. Nothing, because I think she's not only a very good journalist, but she got it right.
All of which brings us to Shane Harris, who has magically shown up on the screen.
It's been too long, Shane. How have you been?
Hi, how are you? I'm good. I love your background.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to say, did you get a new painting? Is that your husband's?
No. Well, you haven't seen this one. This is one of Joe's that he lent me for the back wall.
It's pretty good.
Nice. I like it. It's big, which I like because it takes up a lot of space.
So Shane has a question, which is one of the questions I was going to ask. So this relieves me of the obligation.
Why didn't I give Shane the story? Why did I give it to Julia? That's what he's asking.
Yeah. Actually,
this is Washington right here.
That's right.
I'd like to tell everyone this man is definitely a kook. Okay. So my question, we kind of flirted with one thing I wanted to ask you too, which maybe you incorporate the both of them. Is it still just like an amazing question of like, why the fuck are the Russians doing this when we know they're doing it, right? But maybe like a more direct question, this kind of bears on, the task for the next administration.
Right.
What would you like to see the Biden administration, or just writ large USG, do in response to all of these kinds of harassment?
Right. Oh, that's a great question.
And to deter it, really, to make it stop. Yeah.
So first and foremost, you have to hold them accountable, which is whether it's the issue in the bounties or the issue of these possible microwave attacks. I think the desire to get to 100% confidence on the intelligence is a fool's errand. what was the confidence that bin Laden was going to be in Abbottabad? So ultimately, there's no reason we cannot use the power of diplomacy, whether it's demarches, whether it's working with friendly countries and putting pressure on the Russians. There's a host of things. You can always throw out the term sanctions, but the best way to deter Russian behavior, and look, I did this stuff for 2 years, in my role at CIA, is to publicize it. So, when we talk about kind of covert influence is not, there's nothing covert about it. It's just publicizing Russian bad behavior. It's telling the truth. And so I think that, putting that out there is really important, because at the end of the day, Putin and the Russian regime want to be a respected part of the international community. It's not inviting them to the G20 or the G8. It's very clear to me that there's a lot that can be done. At the same time, and it's a little bit different, in terms of what the new administration can do. I would just really argue that whether it's the new CIA team that's coming in, or the new team at the State Department, or even the Department of Commerce, where officials have been affected from the past in Havana, you got to take care of your people. The U.S. government, we make a pact when we join the CIA, is that we know our leadership, we believe our leadership is going to take care of us. In good times are easy, but really in bad times. And so kind of proper medical care, treating this issue of microwave attacks, or even if you call it traumatic brain injury, you got to treat it like DOD is treating it now. Right now, instead of, we're the NFL right now 15 years ago. We have to kind of catch up to 2020.
And can I ask just a part B to this real quick? And
Sure.
I think some people are sort of hinting at it in the comment section.
Sorry.
Would we respond in kind by going and harming other Russian intelligence officers? Do we do that kind of thing?
Right.
And would that be effective?
So we actually don't. So I'm gonna separate my kind of mature side of me versus kind of the more kind of guttural side. Now, of course, you'd want to say like the FBI should drag some Russians out in New York and kind of beat them. That's not what we do. Not at all. But we could do things like like we did in the past, frankly, closing consulates, PNGing Russian intel officials, working with our liaison services. I mean, you could easily see, if we made the case that one of these types of attacks occurred in places like Australia, which is one of the areas. Why not work with the Australians and then PNG, the Russian intelligence officials who are assigned there? There's certainly ways to do this which really damage the Russians. It both embarrasses them publicly, diplomatically, but also shuts down their intelligence activities. So there's plenty that can be done.
So sorry. Do you want to
Shane? Should we keep you on in case you have further questions, or should we dismiss you and let you disperse into the ether?
I'll atomize.
Okay. See you later.
Thanks, Shane.
So this is kind of a great question, and you saying that your mature side versus your child side, like kind of is like a perfect encapsulation of it, because I'm sitting here thinking, like, what does Russia have like to do this type of like random attack of senior intelligence officials? Like, what can they gain from this? And then we talked about the fear that they create and everything else. But I'm kind of gonna put something like, like you can have power because all of these other people who have power decide to share with you, right? Well, that's like G20. That's like the legitimate above the board type of way that that Russia can have power. That's always been like tenuous-ish. And like what they've clung to instead is the power of being outside the circle and being like a sniper or a rogue agent, or like kind of like wreaking havoc on the regime, and that being a thing. And like part of what strikes me about what happened to you and others, and like this kind of ongoing flipping back and forth between we want to be in the club and then we want to be firing randomly in the club from the outside, is that they don't really have that strong a toehold in either world, such that they're willing to give one or the other totally up, right? Like part of their entire power comes from the fact that like they have like almost like a story, like mythical kind of ability of like doing random cruel things. Right. Sure. So, I mean, does that strike you as right? Or do you think that do you think that it's like, there's something even more like kind of fundamental than that?
Well, I mean, I think let me preface this. I'm not a Russia expert. I mean, so there's plenty of people who I think have probably been on your show, or you talked with, as Julia or John or Mike McFall. I mean, there's some really
President Ilvis in the audience,
right?
Yeah.
no, there's great Russian Russia experts out there. My 2 cents, and again, I'm just, this is from my career as an intelligence officer. There are steps that you have to take that are going to kind of punch them back in the face. I mean, you have to kind of bloody their, so you have to punch back. You have to give them a bloody nose on stuff. That's the only way that this type of behavior will stop. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to, again, drag a Russian out of a car outside the United Nations, with the FBI or in Washington. But it certainly does mean that we can kick them out of our country. There's no reason we can't PNG Russians for this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened quite successfully in 2018 when they made the attempt on Sergei Skripal is there was this really tremendous not only USG response but international response. I mean, for God's sakes, I'm Greek. My last name is Polymeropoulos. The Greeks PNG'd 2 Russians out of Athens. That's unheard of. But that's from really, really solid kind of intelligence diplomacy that the CIA and the DNI and the State Department really conducted. And so there are ways to punish them. And just to show that this behavior is not permitted. Look, and let me just flat out say one thing. When in my visit to Moscow and then talking to others, and even from my very brief time, our diplomats who serve there, it's an extraordinary place. I was talking to officers there, not from the agency, but from the State Department, who have been spit on. They're from just walking in the street. Their houses are broken into. It's a tough spot, and so it doesn't mean though that we have to do the same things against Russian diplomats back here. I mean, there are kind of ethics and norms that we have to adhere to. We can punish them in other ways.
All right, let's go to audience questions.
Sure.
Christopher Argyris, who also has a Greek name.
There you go, I saw that.
And who requested your presence on the show, which is initially how we got the idea of inviting you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marc, for joining us.
Sure.
I had 2 questions. Hopefully I can make...
Squeeze them both in.
Yeah, both of them. So I guess there's one that got uploaded more, which is more about CIA hiring. But I wanted to ask you you said a lot. What does justice look like for you in your case? I know what the U.S. does as an administration is out of your control, but do you feel like with the Walter Reed and the University of Pennsylvania that you're being served, you're being done right?
So let me just start with that. So that's a great question because look, I have battled, the Taliban, Al Qaeda, Hezbollah. I've been in so many multiple war zones and sticky situations. It's amazing I made it out kind of in one piece after that. I actually don't have any kind of animosity or anger about what happened to me. It was part of my job. These things happen. I could have kind of bought the farm anywhere along the line. On a serious note, I want to just get treated so I feel better. And so Walter Reed is really important. I also want justice for me is also to have kind of a systemic and institutional path in which our officers who are being affected by this can get treated. And I'm going to work very hard, with congressional committees, with Congress, and with the incoming administration and the incoming CIA team to make sure that happens. So that's really important. Now at the same time, the Russians, if they are, the ones who are culpable, the ones who are responsible for this, we have to call them into account. But I would say that we also have, a different team coming in who understands that the Russians, what the Russians are. I don't think you're going to see a Russian reset again. I hope not, because it's the same thing that happens every several years. And so it's treating the Russians, what they are, which is right now it's a pariah in the international community, and they have to be held to account.
What's your other question, Chris?
Yeah. Okay, so my other question, and I want to preface this by saying I won't ask you to say anything that you can't say.
Sure.
There's a lot of people who are interested in CIA and sort of demystifying sort of what does it take to get in.
Right.
And I'm not going to.
That's okay.
Not going to go into any of the things that they asked you to do, but I just want to sort of ask about in other job fields, when you go for a final interview, you know, you're going to find out if you don't get the job, who got the job, and you can sort of compare your credentials to that person and say, okay, you know, they were better in this, or maybe they're a better public speaker or whatever. That doesn't happen in your line of work. You don't get in, you get a short letter from you know, strange postcode. So I wanted to ask you whether you think that people that go through that go to the final interview maybe multiple times in some cases.
You must have been reading the kind of the Twitter back and forth between Cypher and I and Zach Tyson, a whole bunch of other folks. No,
I'm not going to reveal how I know that, but let's just say
it's a great question because
I have personal experience from this.
You know,
do they owe something more than saying sorry?
Yeah, so there's two things. One is right. So two things. One, I talk to college kids all the time. I go talk to college student groups for college fraternities and just individuals who kind of hit me up via, you know, maybe references or folks I know. So there, you know, so what does it take to get into the CIA? And you can talk all about kind of this intellectual curiosity about the world and languages, you know, studying and knowing a hard target, a tough language, whether it's, you know, Russian, Arabic, you know, Farsi, Chinese. But in terms of the recruitment process and the hiring, sure. I mean, it's, you know, it's a selective process. Sometimes you're going to get a notification that you weren't chosen. The only thing I would say is, you know, I know a slew of people who have gone back again. And so maybe they want more work experience. Maybe you had a bad interview. Maybe go brush up on a hard target language. But, you know, for the director of operations, the age limit is 35. So you can always apply again. I think it's not like the FBI and some other organizations.
So, that's people get turned down over and over and over again,
yep.
And then they get reaccepted. And that is, and by the way, people fail security clearances several times and then get cleared as well.
You can't try to kind of, you know, we call G2 it. I mean, you can't overthink it. You know, you are dealing with the government. You know, you might have a recruiter who's going to make a mistake. You might have a security officer who's taking a dim view of you. So, what I've told everybody is, if you know, assuming that, you know, you are qualified and you have kind of you can pass the background check, just keep going at it. And you know, because it's just like anything else in life. I mean, if you want it really badly, you got to keep plugging.
So before we go to Susan Brewer's question,
sure.
I just want to foot stomp a point that Tomas Ilves made in the chat, which is, if you really want to hit the Russians where it hurts, the right way to do that is not merely to PNG a whole lot of so-called diplomatic personnel, but actually have the criminal division and the FBI, the criminal division of the Justice Department and the FBI, really focus on money laundering operations.
That's right. Yep.
And the amount of money that is being parked on the part of oligarchs and others in things like U.S. real estate.
That's right.
Particularly London real estate, not U.S. real estate, but is awesome. And the more of that, the more pressure we can put on that, the better. And that is probably more effective than sanctions. If you could really emphasize money laundering and non-shelter of ill-gotten oligarch gains in the West, that we shouldn't be tax shelters for this sort of thing.
You know, if you just read the book Putin's People, you know, if you just even start reading it, it's a you know, shocking indictment of the UK and the amount of Russian money that's there.
The other incredible resource, which is not specifically about money laundering, but is a really great lens into the soul of the Putin regime, is the documentary about Grigory Rodchenkov by this crazy American cyclist called Icarus. And it is, you know, it won the Academy Award in 17 or 18 for Best Documentary. I've done a number of interviews with the filmmaker on the Lawfare podcast. It's just, I think it's actually the best window into the Russian interference in the U.S. election,
Right.
even though it isn't about that and it doesn't mention it. It's just about how the Russians abuse international organizations and cheat. And
you're 100%
beautiful.
Right. Let me jump in one. So I think for the audience, this will be helpful. And I don't want to get us on a tangent. I don't know how much more time we have, but on a serious note. So again, think about me. I came in as a non-Russia expert, and I arrive in January, February of 2017. And what comes across my desk is all of the intelligence, everything from not only from the agency but from the Bureau too, about the contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And so imagine what we think when we hear that Michael Flynn and Jared Kushner went to see the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak to actually set up a secret communications channel via the Russian embassy to the GRU. So I thought my head was going to explode, and I talk about this all the time. And so the defenders of this always talk about the naivete of the Trump campaign, but I will tell you there was absolute alarm in the intelligence community about what the Trump campaign was doing. And this is not the Steele dossier. This is actually hard kind of intel.
It shows up in the Mueller report.
It shows up in the Mueller report.
It's something that happened.
It's and that's why I'm free to talk about it now. But I would equate this, and people have gone crazy when I've said this, is the famous Oval Office meeting with Sergei Lavrov and Kislyak with Trump. That's like after the Russian interference, that's like President Bush inviting Osama bin Laden after 9/11 and saying, what, my bad, it's okay, we're all good.
No. It's worse than that.
Yeah.
It's like him having Osama bin Laden in the White House and saying, I fired Bob Mueller, the FBI director, because he wanted to investigate you guys, and I've relieved a lot of pressure on myself by doing that.
So that's
literally what he said.
And so that is what I felt on this. And so it was a really extraordinary time to be in the intelligence community. And look, I've been very open since I retired about my kind of political leanings. I'm quite happy about the results of the election. But I will tell you, there was a sense of absolute kind of terror and alarm at what we were seeing.
Yeah. And by the way, in that period of time, there are, from sort of January to July of that year, there are unprecedented intelligence community leaks.
Yep.
And that is a reflection of why.
I think as Shane and I have joked, I think Shane is going to be bored with the Biden administration. The Trump administration leaked, and it actually, I would argue, it wasn't from the intelligence community. It actually was from the White House. I mean, extraordinary leaks came out of there, but that's a whole separate issue.
Susan Brewer, you've been very patient, and the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks. Okay, I have 3 questions.
Oh boy.
Okay, but I'm going to throw them all out there and merge them into one, and you can sort of pick and choose. One, how are you feeling, right, today?
Right, as I'm having a glass of scotch, right?
Okay. And then 2, what is the state of Russia? It's hard for me to make out, given the lack of news information that comes to us, and we're overwhelmed with Trump and everything. But it's just like Putin's acting like this just seems like he's doing like the bully in the schoolyard with this kind of trying to understand the mental planning or the strategy behind this kind of attack. And then finally, my question is, what is the method of delivery that is imagined for this kind of thing? It just seems very strange.
So I will try to authoritatively address 2, but let me just flat out. Well, so first of all, about how I'm doing now. So again, I have a chronic headache that never goes away. It's at about a 3 or 4 level. No medication can alleviate this. I'm hoping that the TBI program at Walter Reed, will be able to help. It's this kind of, there's 18 evolutions. They do everything from, of course, more testing with MRIs and others, different medications, but they also do things like mindfulness training. I mean, again, I would be happy to do everything from yoga to acupuncture to, unfortunately, more medication, but But thank you for asking. But I still have a headache at a 3-4 level that never goes away. It's chronic pain. It's probably more a kind of mental health issue for me, just being able to deal with this. I will say, and this is not good, but having a glass of scotch, of course, I feel better right now, but I got to be really careful on that because you don't want to have, look, I understand the opioid crisis now. That, chronic pain is a really big deal. So let's leave it at that. But but thank you for asking how I'm doing. Number two is, about Russia. I admit in this whole kind of endeavor, I'm not a Russia expert, so I will not be able to kind of tell you about the psyche of exactly why they're doing this, other than I go back to just my role as an intelligence officer that ultimately this is that Putin is acting like a bully, and the Russian intelligence services just don't feel that they're constrained by any norms. One of my favorite things to look at, and we loved it at the agency, as I've give this a plug, is Bellingcat. Bellingcat has done incredible work in kind of exposing kind of the Russian intelligence officers' MO in working around the world. But what's extraordinary is their tradecraft is not that good, which means they don't care. Putin doesn't care if he gets caught, whether it's the GRU, and I think the Bellingcat has really focused a lot on the GRU. So, why the Russians doing this? That's for other experts. In terms of delivery systems, there is a enormous amount of expertise in the U.S. government on this. Both, I think we have a lot of intelligence. And again, if you take a look at that, what I refer to as an NSA declassified document that we know what the Russians have. The U.S. government has experimented with things like this. What does it look like? I don't know. But having run, how can I say this? Run kind of signals intelligence operations. It is, we used to joke about what the Scooby van was. The Scooby van is a minivan where you're trying to geolocate terrorists, for example. These are SIGINT collection systems. They're not necessarily large. You wouldn't need anything that's particularly onerous to do this against our personnel. So I think that will come out more certainly in the future. I see someone smiling down there. When I say
that's Genevieve De La Fera, who has the next question. Sure. I just noticed, however, that we are almost out of time. Uh-oh. So I'm going to, but this was after I brought in 2 new people. So I don't want to leave anybody hanging. So for the last 3 questioners and for the guest, relatively quick questions, relatively quick answers, if you will.
Okay. Do you think that the impending transition between the administrations is going to be there's enough fear that there would be a substantively different position from President-elect Biden to President Trump's position to quell or curb aggressive actions from different countries?
Yes, I do, because we're going to have a renewed emphasis on NATO. One of the things that the Trump administration did was kind of really kind of crack down or kind of diminish the role of NATO. I think the Biden administration is going to be outstanding in really kind of pushing and propping up our alliances. So NATO is going to play a huge role, particularly on countering Russian aggression.
Hmm.
David Botts, the floor is yours, but your camera is off, or at least it's off for me, so I can't bring you on.
Okay. Sorry about that. How has this affected your family? And also, thank you for your service.
Oh, thanks.
How has this affected your family and your risk management strategy?
Sure, so that's a great question because
really good question.
So let me say this, and I say this very seriously. I was actually concerned. Look, so I'm retired. This happened to me. I actually thought that coming out publicly on this would actually allow myself a little more safety in being able to travel again overseas. And so, before the pandemic hit, so I do a lot of talks. I wrote a book on leadership that's going to be published in July or June of next year.
Will you come back on the show, assuming we're still all locked down by then?
It's called Clarity in Crisis. It's about leadership lessons from my time in CIA. But my plan, was and is to go out and speak about this both domestically and internationally. And so I think actually by talking about this more, it would deter kind of future Russian attempts against me. I will say that after I retired, I did go on an overseas trip, and the agency and the intelligence community was taking a look at seeing if there was anything that was going to happen to me. But on a more kind of personal note, it's more of kind of my family's worried about kind of my headaches and my physical condition. On a good note, it's chronic pain. It's not something that I'm going to pass away from. It's just something that I need to kind of learn to live with and hopefully find a cure for.
All right. Our last question goes to the great Tony Cava.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for sticking around long enough for me to ask. I was going to ask you how much Russia's changed since I was there, but it sounds like maybe I spent more time there than you got to do. So other than that, what I'm wondering is, seeing that Russia is basically a kleptocratic oligarchy with an extractive economy, smaller than the state of California, are we perhaps taking Russia too seriously? Obviously, they have
it's a great question.
A nasty reach.
So
they have a nasty reach and can hurt people.
Right. Tony, that's a great question.
But recognizing that.
Yeah, no. So you're right. So I think ultimately, China is the existential threat to the United States. I mean, I think everyone kind of agrees on that. What Russia is able to do is it's because they have kind of a leadership that gets up in the morning and says, how can we screw America every day? So whether it's in Syria, whether it's interference in all over Europe in different elections, or interference in the United States, that's the challenge of Russia. I will say that what has been distressing over the last 4 years is, for example, I spent my whole career in the Middle East. We very successfully pushed Russia out as any kind of player in the Middle East, and under the Trump administration, they came back in full force, and so I think it's but it's targeted again. So it's this is not kind of the great economic behemoth that is China. It's not the long-term kind of existential threat to the American economy, for example. It's an irritant, but it's one that sometimes has kind of lethal consequences, whether it's kind of Russian support, for the Assad regime in Syria, or what things that I followed all over Europe was just their never-ending quest to interfere in multiple European states and elections. That's something that we have to kind of battle back, kind of piecemeal, one by one.
We are going to leave it there. Oh, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it strikes me, I mean, we should be treating them with no more respect than we treat Italy or the state of California.
Right.
And, Putin's just a thug who's chopping trees down. And I know they have nuclear weapons and can do stuff to our agents, but we should be hitting them back and hitting them back hard.
Yep.
They also have a huge amount of land and borders with a lot of countries that we care about, and like they are unusually well positioned to be a failing state irritant, and we do have to worry about that. I think we can't not have any relationship with them, but it can be a relationship of, you blacken our eye, we're going to blacken your eye, and by the way, hit you in the stomach too, and we hit a lot harder than you do.
Right.
Marc, so great to meet you. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing this thoroughly depressing and aggravating story with us.
Sorry.
Kate, who is our guest for tomorrow?
Our guest tomorrow is David Kaye. He is a professor of law at UC Irvine, and he is the former, freedom of expression. UN Special Rapporteur. Special Rapporteur for freedom of expression. And that will be 22 hours and 57 minutes from now.
Indeed.
And until then, Ben, what do we say?
We don't have fun anymore, but we, in 48 days, have an opportunity to blacken the Russians' eye and get a little payback for what they did to Marc. And as a surrogate for fun, that ain't so bad. Marc, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
This was great meeting you. Thank you
Come
so
back
much.
when your book is published.
Nice to meet you too. And I'm getting hit up all over the place about my earphones. They said I look like I'm from the 1970s, so I got to.
You do like you are piloting a helicopter from like 1990 Tom Clancy movie, but that's like okay. It's a good look for you.
My friend Olivia is making fun of me right now. So anyway, thanks so much, everyone. It's great to meet you.
See you later.